So, Christopher, what was it like to select a house that was to represent the most haunted house in the Borley sector of England for your film, The Vanishing?
Yeah, it was a strange kind of, it's a weirdly long story, but I'll try and keep it brief, is that we, obviously the story of the true story, if you like. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a believer in the supernatural. So the true story is like somebody went there and, felt they were haunted for whatever I would say their own personal reasons. But we didn't want to be too specific to that story. I was worried that because that story's been told a few times, that we wanted to slightly pull away from it. So we concentrated a little bit more on the idea of what the characters would be like that would be bringing a story of their own story, so that there's a sort of behind the scenes of their life story playing at the same time as, a parallel with someone else's haunted story. Right. So we once we had that kind of idea in the script, the house came about in a very specific way, is that we had the access to shoot on this massive estate, and the end sequence, I won't give the epilogue away, but at the epilogue in the sort of big manor house scene at the very, very end, that is the actual house. And what we then did, we had access to all of that house. We obviously couldn't use that big house as the vicarage. So we used a small kind of servants' quarters, parish end of it, right, to shoot the scene, but then had access to the whole house. So it kind of came out of necessity. And then what we did was we selected each of the rooms that were the weirdest with regard to the design of the wallpaper, the layout of the room, and then put the design of the costumes in line with that. So it was kind of everything happened in reverse, because it was a strange one. So it wasn't that we toured around looking for the exact house. It was that we had the access to make the film with a higher production value than our budget would have allowed us to. So we approached it practically, and then said, okay, which corner of the house is the spookiest, and which rooms are the spookiest, and so it all came about that way. Yeah.
Was there a lot of work that needed to be done, like in terms of like the sets, and was there a lot of things that you needed to add on or take away?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously we didn't want the place to be, it couldn't be as big as that house. So we had to try and find an element of the house that we could use, so we could say, okay, this is the sort of inside space of the house, this corridor, that stretch, this bit. And that actually, as it happened, how do I describe this? The sections of the house we used, we didn't use all of the house, we only used sections of it. We then put fake walls in, partitions and everything else to give it a slightly more decrepit, smaller feel than it would have had. Right. So we did add to it. Yeah, we did a lot of stuff like with the mirror sequences. We would use stairwells for the scene where there's multiple Jesses on the wall. So it was kind of like finding an old disused city in a way and saying, well, we can't use all of this because we don't have the production budget to dress all of it. Right. So and also it wouldn't be realistic if you go into a house, it would be like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, and suddenly it's much bigger than the space of the outside. So yeah, there was a bit of that. I mean, it sounds very practical, but we did have it gave us a lot more money for the design, using what we had, if you like.
So what was your sort of like a filmmaking approach to The Vanishing? I know a lot of people are so into the haunted house genre type of movie, in terms of like Bly Manor and The Shining, Amityville Horror and such. I know there's a lot of influences when it comes to haunted house filmmaking, but what was your direct approach? Did you actually think of these films, or did you just say to yourself, I'm just gonna do it like I wanted to do it?
Yeah, well, I'm not I'm not a massive fan of, I mean, some of the films you've mentioned there, I'm a fan of. Clearly, The Shining, I'm a fan of. And as a kid growing up, the Amityville Horror. I mean, I think the biggest reference for me would always be The Shining, because not so much just the stupendous filmmaking, but the sense that, ghost stories are the things that we carry within us. That if we went to the most, if either me or you went to the most haunted house, so called, in America or in the UK, we would be haunted by our own demons, is how I feel. So looking at The Shining, that's apparent that the writer breaks down. Looking at Triangle, one of my earlier films, it's like you're looking inward at the character and saying, am I bad? What have I done? And so I always kind of brought that. I mean, for a number of reasons, not that I said, okay, I want to do it my way. I find that stories like that, I find them more interesting. And there have been so many good haunted house movies that are just thrill rides, in the sense of things that go bump in the night and all the good jumps. I want to just say that this is a period of 1930s UK where so much of what was going on then is we're seeing now. We're seeing play out now politically, the rise of white supremacy, all of these things that were going on in Europe at the time. And even though from an American perspective, it was Europe, from the UK's perspective, it was Europe. Even though we're in Europe, it was happening in Germany. It wasn't happening in our backyard. Of course, it was happening in our backyard. And so I wanted to sort of lean into that and say, the quintessential remains of the day, Downton Abbey kind of world of what people think is the good old days of England weren't actually the good old days. Right. There's a mother who's married a vicar out of necessity, has had a child out of wedlock. He practically despises her, where he's judging her so much for having a past. And so I just wanted to sort of lean into all those things. Obviously you still need to make people jump. You still need to have spooks and scares. So I think those kind of things happened. I mean, the original script was definitely more in line with, say, Woman in Black, but it certainly, I knew immediately from approaching the project that, we had a small, but not, it was a reasonable budget, small by some of the budgets I've worked with in the past. But I knew straight away that we were working within a certain confine, and that to try to think internally rather than just, throw a load of CGI at it that we don't, So it was it came again out of necessity and digging deep, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. What was it like to work with Anya McKenna Bruce, who has such a pivotal role in the film?
She came to the audition, and I think she was the first girl I saw. She's, I think, about 13, but looks like she could be 10. She was quite short at the time. When she came back to do ADR about a year and a half later, she was literally a foot taller. I mean, a full foot taller. So she's just a natural. We had a lot of fun. I knew when she came in for the audition, I wanted to cast her. I then saw another 10 girls who had come in, and not one of them came close to the sort of way she holds the camera, the way she listens, the way she's just kind of one of those kids that has got it. And her sister's an actor as well. So we just had fun on set. I mean, her mum was always with her. So she had her mum as her chaperone. So I was kind of conscious a couple of times that we don't, push her too far or make her scared in the scenes when she's with the woman in rags. Yeah. But she was, she was in the makeup chair while the woman who plays the woman in rags was getting all her clothes on. So she didn't give a hell, It's like movie sets are so not like the picture you see. Right. So it was, I'd like to take some credit for it, but no, I give it all to her. She, I think the only note I gave her was kind of wave like this when you're waving in the mirror, just because rather than do it because that looks a bit weirder. I think that was about it.
Well, is there a type of, or is there a product, a filming equipment that you used in the film that you found economical and efficient that you would highly recommend to other filmmakers? And the segue question, I guess, to that question is you filmed a lot of scenes in dark places. So is there any type of filming equipment that helped you out in this film?
Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm coming through. So it was, again, a kind of reverse for me. I've always been spoiled without realizing I was being spoiled, that I would have, say, 2 cameras. I would have a Steadicam standing by and you know, and that kind of carried on to when I started doing sort of these big TV jobs I've been doing as well. So I sort of suddenly found that I didn't have those things, and because it was a lower budget. And so I actually didn't have them. And I was kind of working in the opposite, where I had to give people a specific number of days, which were my Steadicam days. And I kind of found that I couldn't do it. So we eventually managed to get a Steadicam. I think the thing that was the big thing for this film as a piece of equipment was we used, I can't remember the make, but we used vintage lenses. Wide angle vintage lenses, which I felt would distort and break up the image in a nice way. One, that would look visually interesting, but two, that would stop the film having a sort of HD high resolution look, which I think would have been at odds with the period and the sort of Hammer horror look that I was going for. So yeah.
So how does it feel to be on Shudder? And yeah, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so obviously when platforms really started to take off, probably about 5 years ago, there was it was around about the time that TV was starting to really, grow out of the, it used to just be The Sopranos or The Wire, and suddenly you've got multiple television outlets and everything seemed to be exploding. And there was a fear that the sort of cinemas were the smaller cinemas were starting to shut down, maybe not in New York, but certainly in London, places that would have shown films like Reanimator when I was a teenager. And I started to, there was a slight worry that we would lose the ability to put indie movies out. I mean, I thought horrors would always be okay, but the slightly odder horrors, the slightly odd indie movies, film noirs and stuff that used to have a platform in those smaller cinema chains off Broadway or whatever. So suddenly to know that Netflix and Amazon, and then now, the fantastic Shudder, that's, a real kind of canon of very, very good movies of a certain type, I think is fantastic. And I think actually we've kind of gone full circle now that is the future, that you make a film, if it's a sort of odd little indie film, something that wouldn't naturally have a big cinema release, you can do the festival circuit, the real horror film fans can see them, and then you can find yourself having a premiere on Shudder. So I think that will help make films less driven by just popcorn and more driven by kind of slightly weirder, more interesting stuff. So I'm really pleased by Shudder and all the platforms. So definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Christopher Smith. I appreciate your time coming here today and doing this interview. And best of luck with this film, of course. And yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. It's been lovely chatting to you. Thanks very much.